Всем привет, меня зовут Антон Занин. Сегодня у меня в гостях Эндрю. Он является американским действующим адвокатом. У него свыше 14 лет реальной практики. Сегодня я ему задам вопросы на тему юридического образования в Америке и о том, как стать адвокатом, стоит ли вообще им становиться, какое состояние рынка, сколько можно зарабатывать, ну и так далее. So, Andrew, it's very nice that you gave me your permission to record this video, because I think for my subscribers it's going to be very interesting to hear real answers on real questions about to be a lawyer in the United States, because I know a lot of people willing to be, and I know a lot of them have very common questions which I want to ask today. And the first question would be like this. So imagine a case if I'm a guy who is studying in average American college, who is willing to be a lawyer, and I don't care whether it's going to be the biggest firm in Manhattan, New York City, on Wall Street, or it's going to be just average firm. I just want to get a job after I will graduate. I want to get salary, some average salary. I just want to get a job, basically. So what is your best tip, your best advice to me as a student of average law school?
Okay, it's a little bit of a broad question, but I'll answer it the best way that I can. And I think it's a fair question, because most of us fall in that sort of average student kind of thing. So very few are going to be in that top 5% of coming out of college or whatever. And the good news is you don't have to do that. That doesn't have to be the case. I think the most important thing for a college student coming, let's say, that gets average grades at a middle of the road college here in the States, the most important thing is that LSAT score, the entrance exam, or that initial test that you take to show prospective law schools, hey, here's my score on this test. You got it. If you are an average student at an average college, it is very important to do well on that test. And that's the entrance. That's sort of that initial test. I've been a lawyer for about 14 years now, and I guess I took the LSAT, and to be honest with you, I'm assuming they still call it the LSAT, but they could call it something else, but it doesn't matter. Whatever that test is now that you have to take in order to get into an American law school or to even be considered, it is vital that the student do well on that test. And in order to do that, typically, like in my case, you take a review course to prepare yourself for that test. Some people didn't, those programs, those courses can be kind of expensive. I think if I remember correctly, they can run in the $600, $700, something like that. And they may be more, and they may be less. I can't remember. I just remember thinking at the time they're
Just to prepare, right?
They're just to prepare, just for these people to stand up there, just like teachers would, and teach you how to take this test. And a lot of it is going to these classes and then on your own trying to transfer what these teachers are teaching you onto these practice tests that they'll give you. They'll give you a big book. Now, some people don't, they go around the course. They don't even do the course. They just get a book where I'm sure there's books out there where you can just go buy the book and it'll have practice tests and you can kind of time yourself. But a lot of that standard test taking, a lot of it is tricks. A lot of it is just, not spending too much time on one question. A lot of it's just sort of has nothing to do with intelligence. It has more to do with how am I going to take this test? How do I approach this test so that I can get the best score? And that's what those programs will typically teach you. And it probably has changed a lot since I took it. So, but that would be the number where I would start is investigate how do I do well on this test, because that is going to be a big factor in whether and what type of law school you're going to get into.
So let's say if I got into the law school and I'm studying already, so what I have to focus on in order, or let's say I'm graduated in law school, right? So I just graduated.
For law school here in America?
In America, yeah.
Okay.
It's just very average law school. I have probably C.
C average, C student,
C,
yeah,
C
gentlemen
student.
C's. We call them gentlemen C's. Yeah.
And I just
That's
graduated.
what I did, basically. So, yeah.
I just graduated and I want to, get a job as soon as possible. And I don't care whether it's like very fancy firm. I just want to get a job. So what is your best advice in order to get a job quickly?
Well,
in that case.
Again, it goes back to there's a lot of good news with the C students because you're still going to be able to get a job. It's not going to be at the biggest, most the most prestigious firms in the country, but those jobs are only a few people get those kind of jobs anyway, and it's not necessarily the best job for everybody. And I guess the second point on that would be there's plenty of C student or lawyers who were C students in law school that are doing very well and make a lot of money, and just like there are plenty of students that, and I hate to kind of the fly in the ointment, there are plenty of students that made straight A's and or were in the top 5% of their law class and ended up hating being a lawyer, ended up not liking it. So it goes, I'm sort of talking in generalities there, but if you're sort of the in the middle of the pack, coming out of a sort of a middle of the road law school, you're still in good shape. It's sort of this. I hate to sort of fall back on this kind of an answer, but I think it applies, and it sort of goes to some things that just sort of apply to everything in life, and that's who do I know, where do I fit in? That's a huge deal with these other let's say just medium-sized to small firms. Typically, it's just like any other office. They're looking for people who fit their mold, who fit what they're looking for, and sometimes it means just somebody who's a team player, or it could be. I know that it's like maybe they've got some clients over here that are Russian that need a lawyer from. A Russian lawyer who can translate, who can do that kind of stuff. I mean, that's a big deal. That is a major highlight for a Russian lawyer who can speak Russian and speak English. I mean, that's a big deal because as you know, the world is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and so it's really about at that point when you're say an average student in an average school is to really market yourself and meet people and find that fit. Because once you find that right fit, then once you get the job, at that point it's all about what you bring to the table. What are you going to bring to the table once you get the job? Which can oftentimes be the hardest part of it. I think it's good news that people will you'll get a job. The question is it going to be the right fit? And that kind of goes to my next point, but I don't want to.
Yeah. So basically,
it's
important to highlight my advantages, like a foreign guy. So if I do speak two languages, let's say for instance Russian, right? Because I think most of all of the subscribers are speaking Russian.
Yeah.
So
and that's awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely has to be highlighted in my resume that I do speak two languages, and I have to make.
And I think that also gives a Russian lawyer an advantage somewhere where they might not otherwise get a job at a certain firm because maybe they are an average student, but they know how to speak Russian. Maybe in some instances they may be able to get their foot in the door at a firm that they might not otherwise get the opportunity. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what we are saying also, it's important to do your own research on companies, how you can make your skills to fit into that particular company. And when you see after research, when you see that company is looking for a particular guy, and you understand that you have some particular skills, that's the best way to apply and to build your resume based on those particular requirements that company has, that firm has, right?
Sure. That's, obviously that it's sort of that information is power kind of thing. Knowledge is power, and because there's going to be certain. Quite frankly, there are going to be certain. Depending on what your credentials are, some firms will automatically, they do that on purpose. It's like you had to have gone to this type of law school. You have to be this. You have to be a law review at this law school. You have to be top 5% or whatever the requirements can be. But keep in mind too that, and I don't know if this is the case in Russia, but keep in mind that we have recruiters here too. I mean, there's headhunters and recruiters that you can go to that can also give you that sort of feedback about what's going on in the market and where your skills might fit in or be best put to use.
So you shouldn't just stupidly shoot emails with your resume to firms, right? You have to contact recruiters and speak to them and together build probably the resume or find out what's going on in the market, as you mentioned,
Well,
and just to make right action after.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, as a general rule, you know, it's a lot. You help your chances, or your chances increase the more you're on the phone with somebody or talking to them. And you have, even, you know, if it's face to face or on the phone or whatever. When you have any kind of relationship, however small or limited it may be, I think it generally can help. But, you know, there's something to be said for playing the numbers game too, and throwing your resume out to 100 different firms and their managing partners and seeing what comes back, because you don't know. There's no one way to go about this. There's no one way.
So the connections are definitely important.
There's no doubt about it. Connections are huge for a lot of reasons, but absolutely. I mean, that's why it's so important. And I didn't do a good job of this earlier in my career, and I regret it. I did not do a good job of networking and connecting and building relationships the way that I should have.
All right. So let's say if I'm a student who is studying in a good school, or probably I don't study yet, I just decided to come to the United States, you know, and become a huge lawyer, like in the top of those, like you said, 10% of the biggest firms on Wall Street. So what needs to be done in that case? What is your advice?
To me, that part of it, I mean, it's.
But
to me, you have to really. I mean, and I don't know, because I've never worked at a big firm. I wasn't recruited by Fulbright, Georgia, or Baker Botts, so I can't speak to that. I do know, or I have an inkling that. Yeah, I've known guys I've had friends that have worked at the bigger firms, and so usually that means, or it looks like, going to one of the top law schools and being one of the top students in your class, being on law review, order of the coif, things like that distinguish you from most, if not all, of your classmates at a very good law school. But there are people that go to schools that aren't considered maybe the top 15, top 20 who were the number one in their class, and they end up, you know, it's like it really, you have to do a lot right. I mean, you have to be really good from a really good law school, and your grades have to be, your standing in your class has to be very, very strong. And even then, you're still dealing with everybody across the country that was a top, top lawyer in their class. But but that's not what I mean. This is just my opinion. But everybody's road is different, and the big firm context and the big firm culture doesn't always work out for people, and that's not always what people enjoy, or it's not the right fit. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about how important it is, I think, to be in a situation where the individual skills and mindset and personality sort of fit, and expectations, fit with what their bosses, what their employers' expectations are.
So how is the market? How is the law market doing right now in the United States?
I cannot speak to the sort of the broad aspect of the market, legal market in the United States right now. I do know that there are the market here in Texas generally, and in Houston specifically, is saturated with attorneys, and but there's plenty of work. There's always going to be jobs. There's always going to be people. For every lawyer that's coming into the deal, there's lawyers going out trying to do something else. There's a big contingency of lawyers who are tired of, who have been doing the lawyer thing for 10, 12 years, and they realize they want to do something else, or that they just want a different deal. So, the market's saturated, but I know here in Houston there's a lot of need for energy based or energy experienced in oil and gas lawyers and transactional lawyers. The requirements for those jobs are at least what I've seen, are very specific, and so there's a lot of competition for those jobs. There's always going to be, just to distinguish, there's the litigation side, and there's always going to be lawsuits, and but there's also just there's a lot of lawyers. So, and there's nothing you can do about that. But it's not a,
So it's
if you want a job doing legal work, you'll find a job.
Yes, so it's not impossible. So there is a competition, but at the same time, there's a lot of spots which could be filled in by new people who are graduating, and so
you may not be qualified, or you may not be considered for an in-house counsel job at Shell or at Chevron or a major oil and gas company, but you can I believe that if you want to be a lawyer somewhere, you'll find a job. It's just a matter of when and where. And like I said, I hate to I know I'm being repetitive, but it's just like fit is a big thing, because
it's just research, connections, right? And
usually it's I would say separate from research is you taking advantage of all the resources at your disposal. And you'll have the student or the individual will have resources at the law school. They'll have resources with the State Bar of Texas, if they're practicing here in Texas, and resources like you were saying, connections and relationships, and all those things are so much. I think, looking back, looking back not just on my professional career, but my educational background, educational history, how important the building and maintaining and cultivating relationships is. To me, that is, and I would think that would be even more important for someone coming over here that doesn't necessarily speak great English or is learning how to do that. I mean, it is the most important thing, because I think America is not unlike most other countries, or the people that in this country are not unlike a lot of other people in other countries, in the sense that if you know how to build relationships with people, people want to help you generally. They want to help you. They want to see you do well, and it's hard to do alone. It's a hard thing to do alone.
So, if I really decided to become a lawyer, so how much could I possibly make? I understand salaries are variable, and it depends really from what kind of field you want to work in, right? So whether it's oil companies, as you said, or something else, but what's the the average salary people are earning right after graduation of average school when they didn't end up at Harvard and stuff like that?
Yeah, I don't know what the average numbers are right now. Yeah. I know that that's easily found. I mean, you can look up, like, for instance, what first-year lawyers are making when they go to the biggest firms, the ones that pay the most. I think it's around $160,000 a year or something like that. But as far as what you can make, it kind of goes back to what I was saying before, is that once you get the job, it's just like anything else in life, a lot of it usually or typically comes down to what your performance looks like, whether it's you bill the most hours, or you bring in new clients, and so it's hard to say. I think if you go work, you can I think typically if you get a job coming out and you're an average student, you're going to maybe a medium to small size firm, maybe you're starting out at $55,000, $65,000 a year or something like that. It may be more, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little less, just kind of depending on where you go.
Yeah, so
but as far as what your ceiling is on it, that's largely determined by the individual and by forces that may not be in the control of that. But there's certainly a lot of there's a lot of lawyers that have made a lot of money, have done really, really well, and have done ridiculously well, and then there's lawyers that have kind of been on the partnership track at firms for 7, 8, 9, 10 years, and then they become a partner and they stay at the same firm for 25, 30 years, or however long it is they stay a lawyer. Then there's people that bounce around everywhere and go to, they go to a different firm every couple of years, and it kind of, everybody's journey is different in life in general, but I think with a lawyer, or being an attorney is no different. It's like it can. There's all different ways to navigate those waters and find what's right for that person. Find what works for you, because there's so many different factors that go into this whole thing about what are your employer's expectations about new business and billing hours, or whatever it is, whatever the context is, whatever kind of law that you're practicing. And so, but I think it's important. One of the most important things is if any way that you can distinguish yourself. I mean, that makes, obviously that increases your value, and a lot of times that will typically mean, or it could mean, having a specialty that's pretty that is very specialized. I know it's repetitive, but it's very specialized, and that is in demand.
And demand is existing right now, right? So
well, for instance, like intellectual property lawyers or trade secret lawyers, and I'm just using those as an example. Right now, what's hot is the energy lawyers, oil and gas transactional type lawyers.
Is there the best place or the best state where, let's say, if I'm willing to get I wanna ended up with work career, right? And I'm looking for some law school. Is the best state in the U.S. where I have to be for studying, or it doesn't really matter where I am? So is there a specific place, specific state which is the best for people who want to study for law, like the state which has the best law schools?
I don't think so. It's like you and I were talking about before we were doing this, is that like I was just using California as an example. We were talking about bar exams, that once you graduate from law school here in the United States, typically then you'll take a bar exam for the bar exam that is prepared and done by and put on by the state in which you're going to be practicing. So, like for instance, I'm licensed to practice and have been licensed to practice in Texas for about 14 years. I'm not licensed to practice in any other state in the United States. Now there's some rules that if I needed to handle some legal matters in another state, there's some things that I can do to go through the courts and get permission to practice law there for some some limited amount of time, or for some temporary purpose. But typically, if I wanted to go, for instance, if in the next 6 months or a year I wanted to start practicing law in New York or California or Florida, I would need to go take their bar exam in order to be licensed in their state, and thus be able to practice law. And so, like California's bar exam is notoriously hard. It's like I think it's only about 50%. Only about 50% of the people who take the California bar exam pass it on the first go. So I'm not going to be taking the California bar exam, but. So it's really like we were talking about before, is that it's really state based. It's the rules are a little different. The bar exams are a little different in each state. But every state has a bar exam, and anybody that wants to practice law in that state has to pass the bar exam.
So that's a very important point, actually, right? So before to go to any law school, people they have to take into account where they want to work, in what city, what state, right? Because if they will get involved in a school and they will pass that particular bar exam in that particular state, and they will, it's going to be, Oklahoma, right? And they will decide to go to Wall Street after, they will need to pass another bar exam in New York City.
Yeah, but you could, saying that though, it's a good point, but let's say you were going to an Oklahoma law school and you wanted to ultimately practice in New York, you could still graduate from an Oklahoma law school and then go study for the bar exam in New York.
But you will need to pass separated bar exam.
Yes, you would need to. You would, if you wanted to be licensed to practice in New York, you'd have to take the New York bar exam.
Okay, but it doesn't really matter where you got your education, right? So where you graduated, it doesn't really matter.
No,
It's
you
the
don't have to.
Oklahoma.
Well, it doesn't matter in the sense that I don't have to go to a Texas law school to be licensed to practice law in the state of Texas. I just have to pass a Texas bar exam.
So it's like driver license, right? Every state has its own driver license. You have to pass the exam in motor vehicle department, but you shouldn't study from the scratch how to drive a car, right? Because the car is driven by the same way.
Yeah, you know, it's an interesting. It's kind of an interesting issue because I can remember hearing about, and I don't know anybody that's done this, but my understanding is that you don't even, I don't know that you have to necessarily go to law school. You can take a state's bar exam, and if you pass that bar exam, I think you might. I don't know this, but it may be just like a. That may be, I may be talking out of my butt, but I thought that I'd heard before. That I've heard before in the past that if you can go straight to taking the bar exam. I don't think that's a good idea if that's allowed, and it rarely ever happens because it's really hard. And the people that are watching this, when they go to law school, they'll understand. When you're a first-year law student, you don't know what the hell is going on. I mean, it is a different way of thinking. Thinking like a lawyer, that's what they sort of call it generally, is learning how to think like a lawyer. I don't care how analytical you are before, or what, you know, how intuitive you think you are. Going to law school, I can remember, you know, being a first-year student and reading those initial cases that we had to read and not understanding one word that was going on or what it was. And maybe I'm just not very bright, but the bottom line is, I think it's generally a good idea to go to law school, but it's like we were talking about before. It's expensive. You know, law school is expensive, and I think that's another consideration that needs to be taken into account. That if you don't have a scholarship or you don't have funds, or someone's helping you pay for law school, the debt can really add up for people that graduate from law school, and they can end up having this debt over their head for a substantial amount of time. And I've seen that happen with you know, some people, and I think that's a very important. Excuse me. I think that's a very important consideration too, and that's why I was saying before is that really look into when you do get accepted from a law school, or when you are applying for law schools, is look for those programs that might be able to help you out financially without having to incur debt, because that can be a long-term payoff thing, and it can kind of defeat the purpose of doing it to begin with. Does it make sense?
Это был действующий адвокат в Америке, в штате Техас. Thank you, Henry.